I'm really, really excited to be here, partially to share our journey, partially to talk about FinTechs, but more than anything else, to share about the ecosystem and how we work with it, right? We're a big 185-year bank, a vibrant bank, and we're in a period of transition. And so what we're trying to figure out more than anything is what we're going to become. And FinTechs are a part of that. But what I'm going to talk to you about today isn't just FinTechs. It's a bunch of other things too. And so what I'm really hoping for, how much time do we have here? I know we're running 30. We're good there? So what I'm really hoping to do is to spend 15 to 20 minutes talking about slides, and then have really a solid 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how we do, to actually answer some questions. Is that okay with you guys? Randy, does that work for you? Yeah, all right, good. Randy's helping me today. So this is me. I'm the Executive Vice President of Digital Banking at Scotiabank. I joined 1 year ago, June 15th, and it's been an amazing, amazing year. I spent the last 20 years in Silicon Valley working for a lot of the companies that Michael just told you about, but there were two transformative experiences that I had in my career that made me want to work at Scotiabank. The first, I was the Chief Technology Officer for Pearson PLC, which is the largest book publisher in the world. It's also the largest education company in the world. And depending on your perspective on those two industries, they're either dying or in a state of change. But what we were really working on was transforming them from the inside out. And I describe that experience a lot of different ways, but it's addictive, right? The transformation process is addictive, it's exciting. The second thing that I did was I worked at Money Supermarket, and also a UK-based company. What we did there was we saved everyday UK citizens money with their financial services. So while we made a bit of money, about £250 million a year, we also saved UK citizens about £2 billion a year, right? So the comparison function there, paired with really good financial services, was something that was great for everybody. The combination of the two, I think, meeting up with, there were probably 4 industries that I was looking at, or 3, depending on how you cut it. Obviously banking and financial services, healthcare, education, and maybe government. And so to be able to participate in a transformation with something that's so foundational for our civilization is amazing. And so that's really why I joined. Eric said something pretty interesting in the previous discussion, said we should watch a YouTube video. I was left with, what were any of you guys left with? What else were you thinking? I was thinking Terminator, right? Do you remember the opening scene in Terminator? Skynet's learning at a geometric rate. In a panic, the humans try to pull the plug, right? Do you remember that? As we're starting this journey, we have moments in our history, and banking is one of them, where we have this environment with 2016 exponential growth in the industry. And there's an ebb and flow to the funding model, but $36 billion in USD, 1,500 funding deals, 40% of those focused on payments, banking and lending accounting for almost 25% of those. Now, this is where I get a little bit wound up, right? As a bank, if you think about what we do as run the bank, 185 years of history on behalf of our customers, change the bank, which is what we do today and what we're doing going forward, and then innovation, what do you really think that the balance of that is? It's a lot of run the bank, it's a lot of change the bank, and it's probably less of innovation. We're trying really hard, but that's $36 billion disruptive innovation funding. And so I don't necessarily look at somebody like SoFi in San Francisco that's taken $1.5 billion over the last 18 months and think that they're going to throw us off our game. I really don't. But I do worry that we're not innovating enough. And that's horrifying. Who does that scare? I mean, there's got to be a bunch of bankers in here, right? I am. It's horrifying. Does that keep you up at night? Yeah, it really does. So when we look at these numbers, that's where we start from. But the ecosystem isn't just new startups. This was a survey that was conducted recently. Roughly 1 in 3 customers would consider switching their accounts to Google Amazon or Facebook if they offered financial services. Does that surprise anybody? Who would sign up for those if they offered them? I would. Come on, don't lie. I mean, you probably would, right? You trust these guys. And so do I, right? I love working at Scotiabank, and I love what we provide for our customers across almost 50 countries. But these services that are coming up, there's a degree of trust and innovation in each of them that is staggering. It's not just the money. It's a customer-centric approach to innovation that is disrupting us. Things have changed, right? We live in this ecosystem. And so as we start building all of our services going forward, we have to keep those things in mind. This is pretty heavy. Ant Financial, have you guys heard of that? Yeah. It's an affiliate of Alibaba, which was the largest IPO in history. They launched at $25 billion when they went public. It was the largest IPO. They're worth over $300 billion today. Ant Financial, 432 million monthly unique visits on the phone last month. Whew. Right? Amazing. Valued at $60 billion US, grew by 60% in the last year. And you know what? They're already here. People go, oh, when do you think they're going to come to Canada? They're here, right? How big do you think that they are in Vancouver? They might actually be bigger than any of the other banks in Vancouver, right? Any of the major introduction points for immigrants like me into Canada, they're there. And so this environment isn't just about startups. It's about different things, right? Products, technologies, services. 100 countries and growing by the day. China's first private bank launched by an internet provider. That is Tencent over the top. WeChat, which many of you guys probably utilize in the room or have utilized if you've got friends and family over there. And then WeBank. Grew to 10 million users, banked over 16 million USD, first year since launch. They're growing sort of at we talked about Skynet, growing at a bit of a geometric rate. It's pretty remarkable. In Latin America, where we have a huge, huge footprint. I mean, we're north to south on this. FinTech for inclusion is dominating with unbanked populations. In Peru, only 29% of adults have an account at a formal institution, financial institution. A couple of other things to think about. While we do very well in Peru as a bank, only about 25% of our customers, or our prospective customers, actually have smartphones, right? And so while we're innovating on some of these things, the dilemma that we have is, what is it that we can actually feed back? It's almost an anti-innovation function. But there's innovation nonetheless. It's in crowdfunding, microfinance, peer-to-peer lending. Vast majority of people in these countries, it's simply the barrier to entry on an expensive piece of hardware, not the sophistication or the need of being banked. And so as we start working this, it's a highly fractured environment that we have to fight on multiple fronts with. Blockchain, it's a technology rendering intermediaries obsolete. This is the one that really gets me. I'm 45. I was at Alta Vista. For those of you that are old enough to remember Alta Vista and the sound that Google made when they ran by us. This is how I feel about this one, right? Banks are trusted third parties. We're the trust element of putting people together. If you potentially didn't need to do that to transact, would you? Would you go through a bank? And so for us, I think in about 80% of banks worldwide, we're investing in our own blockchain technology to be the disruptor, I would say probably, rather than the disrupted. But where does that go? It's very difficult to figure out. Build, borrow, or buy. These are two tension points for us. We've got an investment, right? We also have an acceleration and capability focus that we're trying to engender across our teams. So with VCs, we partner, co-invest, or create. With direct investment, we make an equity investment in small to mid-sized fintech companies. We're doing some of these things. Partnership and licensing, we partner with small to large size companies, just like everybody else. Incubation and acceleration lab, I am responsible, you'll see in a second, for 5 digital factories where we're doing a lot of this work, but we're also working with people like Ivy and Rotman School of Business to be able to do very similar things. And finally, we've got proprietary solutions. Some of this, actually, we can't talk about today, but we are working on some proprietary solutions to be able to get ahead of the curve. So building those internal solutions and offerings is really important. So we have an innovator's dilemma, and I think a lot of you guys do too in the room. It's not only how we choose to partner and how we work with FinTechs that will make us or break us. It's whether we are willing to redesign how we operate entirely from the ground up. One of the things that I'm most excited about since joining the bank is that we are completely aligned at the top, right? But it's a cultural change. It's interesting. Where do you start? Do you start from the bottom up, or do you start from the top down? We started from the top down. And so whether it's Brian Porter talking about us as a technology company that provides financial services, whether it's the work that we're doing in our Pacific Alliance countries, which is Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Colombia, or Canada that we have here with digital factories, we're making a commitment to start up at the top, fill it out in the middle, and then this cultural sea change that we need to do from the teller network all the way up, from the branches, is what's next. And we're working just as fast and as hard as we can to be able to do that. So who we are. As I said, we've got these 5. Most important part of it is that they're stitched together with a global digital banking function. So if you guys ever read about us, you'll see digital factories. Those are the 5 physical locations that we have. In the center is the digital banking unit or digital banking organization, which is kind of like coach of coaches, master of masters. And we're stitching this group together and providing a fair amount of the DNA directly here out of Canada. And we think about this almost as our version of Cupertino, right? So what are we going to do out of Toronto? We're going to lead, but we really do believe that we can innovate locally on behalf of our customer. Our target culture is not what you'd expect of a bank, and it's not without its own growing pains. It's been a really interesting process. Design thinking at the beginning of everything that we do. A genuine openness to change, even if it compromises what it is that you do at the bank, right? Retraining is a really important, critical part of this as we move forward. A bias to action. I liked what Eric said, where start small, basically start today. That's hard. We think all the time that we're ready to be able to release code, but then we have a restatement of the numbers, or it's a defect rate or debt rate that we're not happy with. And how do we actually manage that? It's very difficult. Maker culture, test and learn approach, data-driven, fail-fast mentality. Really? Right? Like, are we really going to have a fail-fast mentality at a bank? We have to mitigate the risks and to be able to keep our risk profile and our footprint whole, right? Our shape whole. So what does that mean with the bank? We're pushing those boundaries. And then finally, small, self-organizing, empowered teams. I said before, design-led. At the beginning of all of our work, we're looking at design research. And so this is a design-led product organization that is grafting its way into a product owner mentality that has functioned very well for the bank. Both actually have to work together for this bank of the future, for us to continue with this vibrant program that we have going on. But it's a step in a different direction. So at the beginning of this, we do ethnographic research, design research, all the stuff that you've heard about with design thinking. Exploration and design and product implementation is really fast. Prototype, test, iterate. A number of our most recent programs were out the door 6 weeks or less. Some are taking longer, not going to lie to you. If they touch legacy or back office systems, it's exceedingly difficult. But those things that are floating separately from that, we're really speeding up. But it's really kind of pushing the boundaries of what it is to be a bank and what it is to be customer focused. So this isn't necessarily the bank. This is even us on the digital side. We are digital sales driven. We are trying to figure out a way to be able to make sure that we're selling better for our customer, that it's cheaper, faster, better, essentially. But how is that balanced with customer experience driven? Might that not have a tangible benefit towards the bank in the traditional ways that we've thought about this, right? At the end of the day, I think about it as, let's add millions of customers that are delighted with our services and keep the ones that we have and make them better off. And that's not just a silly tagline. We believe it here, right? But there's a transformation there. If we take care of our customer experience, we think that our employees and our shareholders will benefit, our customers are going to be better off, and the ecosystem is going to be vibrant and healthy. I thought this was cheesy when I put this up there. I still think it's cheesy now that I look at it. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Eric, when he was talking before, just talking about getting moving today, right? It's hard. We constantly want to make things perfect before we put it off into the environment, and we can't. And if we don't learn some of the basic things that a number of those companies that I illustrated at the beginning are doing, which is a fail fast mentality, for lack of a better term, or succeed fast, as many of them already are, then we're going to be relics, and we want to avoid that. And so as we're thinking about this, we're holistically thinking about what it is that we want to do and the shape that we want to be in the future as a bank. But there's a lot that's keeping us up at night that is driving us on behalf of our customer so that we can do a better job each and every day. So that's the first part of the discussion, but I know that we want to also do some questions. Would it be okay if I asked, or if you guys asked a few questions? What's getting...
So what we've been doing so far is we've got 2 mics. We haven't really heard from the wings of the room. It'd be great to have questions from back there, but I also am getting questions online.
Oh, cool.
So which non-Canadian bank do you see as the leader for fintech and digital transformation? Who are you sort of watching?
USAA, I just went down to San Antonio recently. I thought they were spectacular. They started out about 100 years ago, I think. Maybe it was just last year. No branches, 5 or 6 physical locations in centers where I think it's mostly Texas now at this point, but I think it's also maybe in Arizona. Armed service members that are obviously living and working remotely have pretty serious requirements for their digital banking organization. What I find pretty interesting about what they're doing, though, is that it's not just their app. They are genuinely happy when their customers call the call center. So it's not just, hey, it's going to go to the app, we're going to get rid of the call center, we're going to get rid of physical branches. They look at each and every one of those interactions, physical or otherwise, as a completely blended environment. And when people call in, they actually buy more products. When people call in, the NPS, for those of you guys, Net Promoter Score, when people call in there, it's not actually usually a fail point. It's an accelerator. So when people call into that environment, it's very consistent, actually rated higher than the app itself. And so to me, USAA is a wonderful example of that. It's also great that we don't have to be competitive with them because they're a regional approach, but yeah, they're spectacular.
Okay.
The wings. Come on, guys. You guys are way out there. Everybody tired?
I've got another one. Sweden's Klarna, a fintech startup, acquired 60 million customers in 2 years and became a bank last week. How can incumbents compete with this kind of pace of change?
Who did that?
It's anonymous.
Yeah. I think having a physical presence is a real advantage. There's been a movement into believing that branches are a thing of the past. I think it's quite the contrary. I think we can make better and better customer experiences by having that physical human reinforcement. More human. It's a big thing for us. So I don't know. I mean, 60 million in Sweden. What does that mean? Really, 60 million? For us, I think it's just being singularly focused on the customer at the expense of almost everything else. And if we do that across our footprint, we have potentially 250 to 300 million customers across 48 of our countries that we could be adding in the years to come that might be able to dwarf that if we get the mix right. But I think it's a multi-threaded approach to customer service that's going to be important to do that. It's kind of a half-ass answer, but I think I believe that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, over there, please.
Yeah. Talked about the different countries and some of the take-up rates for these new businesses. Canada being a large piece of land, not very well populated. Is there a threat that we could be developing too much of this fintech and hyper technology, if you will, or could we be developing things ahead of what people want? Could we be making solutions for which we don't know the problems yet?
Yeah, are we saying this is good or bad?
I think this is all good. It's just that Canada being what it is.
I'm an American. What
might,
are we talking about here?
It might be that some of these things are coming out and people may say great, or people may say, oh, no, it's okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. We really try to keep our shape from an innovation perspective. So the vast majority of our technology work that we're doing has a tangible customer outcome. We are looking into a few things like blockchain, bots technology, AI, and ML. But at least for us, we're keeping that relatively small. There's no shiny objects that we're going at with this. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm sure some people will bite off more that they can chew in that regard. And I think once you kind of go there, you're probably ignoring some of your legacy systems, which in many ways are the lifeblood to providing really good customer experience today. And so for us to be able to, balance those with the right ratios is important. We do have a patent plan for innovation here at Scotiabank. That's an interesting way for us to be thinking about it, right? One part of it could be innovation, one part of it could be a defensive posture. So it's probably a little bit of both, but we're trying to make sure that we're not over-indexed on stuff that nobody wants, right? And that's part of the fail-fast infrastructure, I think, that we're trying to put in place here socially, culturally, is for those things that we are trying out that are net new, if they don't resonate with the customers, they go away, and we don't continue to invest in that. Actually, that's a mitigating part of the costs of this. If it takes you a long time to develop something that you don't know that you have a customer for, you can end up spending a lot of money and getting zero returns. So that's part of the reason that we've picked up the cadence for the development of this type of work, and hopefully we're avoiding that and just delighting our customers instead. Yeah.
Brian McConnell, Wellington Consulting Group. Picking up on Bill Gates' comment of we overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. What do you think we're going to accomplish in the 2 years time frame, and what do you think we're going to accomplish in 10 years in the fintech environment?
That's a great question. I really look to, so Canada is an amazing proving ground for what it is that we're trying to do. There's no question of that. But I might argue that as a template for 48 countries, with a pretty substantial, you saw with Peru, a pretty substantial unbanked population, that group of people is going to accelerate, right? We're going to see a middle class on a level that we've never seen before. We're already seeing it in China and India. We're definitely going to see it everywhere from Mexico on south. And so I think what we put together, what is it that we're going to be enabling for the unbanked to be able to reach their potential as middle class? I think the middle class function in Latin America is going to happen much faster than anybody thinks. Mexico and everywhere else. So in that window, is that going to be 2 or 3 years out? Well, you could look at some of the individual countries and say, well, Peru's had a really tough year. They're only going to grow at 1 or 2% GDP. But when you look at the adoption of some of the technologies, there are some things that are incongruent on that. And so I think if you look at some of the leading, some of those leading areas, it'll be really interesting to sort of see, I think, from a cultural perspective, what happens when so many people enter the middle class. Can banking play a big role in that? I certainly hope so. Hey, Randy, how many people in Peru have mortgages? It's like 200,000 people, right?
Yeah, it's a shockingly low.
Who does that surprise? Like, Peru's a big country. It's got like 200,000 mortgages, right? So what's going to happen when we provide banking services that pull people up. I think that there's a lot of really good things that can happen for banks and for society. A lot of great things that are going to happen for the customers at the same time. I think we can play a big role in that.
Right here in the middle.
Hi, Jerry Gates, Payments Canada.
Hi.
Canadian banks have a ton of legacy technology that's sort of getting buried under layers of newer technology. How
The legacy technology question, come on. No.
how does that ultimately get solved, and maybe what's Scotia's approach to that?
Our technology team is taking a pretty radical approach to that, and that is that we're looking at building out services, microservices and otherwise, for nearly every core system that we have. And it's an evolutionary process for us, for sure. We're picking a few things out where we think that we can build out, a service between developers, a service between core banking systems in some of our countries. And we are not going with a monstrous, enterprise-wide, huge expenditure. We are going to pick at it with small things, the same way that we're building our software. There are a couple of examples that are pretty tough today, and it's impacting our customers. If somebody from Colombia, for instance, where we have our own infrastructure, has to also hit core banking systems out of Canada for all sorts of different reasons, the round trip to be able to provide the primary asset load on that device can be long. Like, I'm talking like not just seconds, like maybe 15 or 20 seconds, and we're not alone in that. And so that is largely a function of what you see with legacy systems. So how do we take legacy systems and get it so that they're a service that can deliver key functionality in, say, 0.2 of a second? That's the next frontier for us from a technical perspective. And we're picking at it through services-oriented architecture, even applying to old things. Now, with that said, I guess what I would tell you is that our mainframe infrastructure, it works really well. I mean, everybody always wants to, worry about what that's going to do in terms of, effectively disintermediating ourselves. Quite to the contrary, they're bulletproof. And so as we work with that, how do we take some of those core systems, not just tear them out for no reason whatsoever, but improve them? Make the data available faster, make the round trip for a service call just that much faster. And so we're looking at it as a series of small, discrete movements as opposed to a bunch of enterprise moves. Is that a reasonable answer? Okay. Yeah.
Hey, Shawn, my name's Yanni Levy. I'm with CIBC.
Hi.
Across the street. In Europe, there's sort of the Wild West going on right now with some of the FinTechs out there. I'm curious if you've seen anything in the space of challenger banks. That you talked about customer experience and that being an area of focus. Anything interesting that you've seen out there?
Yeah, I was just talking to the head of product at mBank in Poland, and digital-only bank. Gosh, I can't remember when they were founded. I would say the mid-2000s, or maybe a little bit before that, but they bought another bank in Poland during that time. Didn't have any physical infrastructure, no branches, none of that. Building great customer experiences first from a digital perspective, and so there's very little in the way of legacy infrastructure, to answer your question from before, which is a great thing. What's really interesting about what they're doing, though, is that they now have over 200 physical locations in Poland and a couple of the other countries around there. I'm sorry, like geography. But they're actually putting physical locations back in and marrying the two up. And so they're taking a hit in terms of the infrastructure and maybe even some of the legacy that they're building as a function of wanting to have better customer experiences. So I find that type of thing really interesting. Apple, I think the Genius Bar is the best example of that, probably in the world. I don't think anybody thought that they were going to be the most, per square foot, the most profitable locations really anywhere from a retail perspective. Maybe we can do something similar and kind of meld the two. Yeah. So mBank, they were unbelievably generous with their time. And really just wanted to share their journey. You guys should check it out. It's a really interesting bank.
So we have time for 2 more questions. I think
cool.
There's 2 more people who have the mic.
One of the earlier questions asked about 2 years and then 20 years out. You answered the 2 years part. I was wondering if you could give us your 20-year prediction for whether or not banks are now platforms. What does bank look like in 20 years?
Are you guys friends or something?
We actually live in the same street.
The 10-year one is really interesting. Did you see that Mark Zuckerberg was talking? I can't remember if anybody, maybe you would know, Michael. What was he talking about with? Basically, it was a universal wage, right? Whether you're working or not. This is sort of socialism a little bit, and I realize I shouldn't be talking about that from the bank, but I really think it's very interesting to be seeing what's going to be happening with automation, AI, and ML, the non-scary parts of it. I'm sure Eric could probably talk about it far better than I can. He's in the back. But it's, I think that it's going to, AI in particular, and machine learning, I think is going to equal the playing field in a lot of ways in terms of the distribution of wealth and what we do in a very positive way, probably healthier people. And so what is the impact if people have changed the way that they work? And the way that they work changes, there's going to be a big difference in taxation, probably multinationalism. There's a lot of different things that are going to be happening in this environment in the future that the banks are going to have to be very adaptable to. And so from a banking perspective, cross-border transactions for us, actually, we're not organized terribly well for that, right? We essentially have, for lack of a better term, 48 subsidiaries, right, in our banking environment. And so as things are changing, what is it that we're going to do when people are simply moving around? They're less rooted to their physical location. There's a higher level of middle-class people. Or maybe it's completely different, right? Maybe it's not middle class anymore. And so for us, what we have to be very adaptable for from a product perspective, I would say, is contemplating a few of those scenarios. Very similar to the way that Royal Dutch Shell did in the 1970s, where they talked about oil going down. I don't know. I mean, a scenario planning exercise for us to be thinking about what 10-year and 20-year planning would be for a bank is probably going to be really critical. The teams in China, it was sort of fascinating. Ant Financial and WeBank, one of the things that they called out was that they don't believe in enterprise software. And so every single thing that they do is open source because they actually want to mimic the way that people are going to work in the future. Less of this enterprise stuff, more open source, more sharing some of this corpus of knowledge. And so, I think there are going to be some social impacts for the technology changes in the future that are also going to put pressure on us. And so we have to create products that are in line with that. So we think about it all the time, but there's no crystal ball. I will say though, on the other side of this, every time we think that something's going to go much faster than it is, who thought Apple Pay was going to change the world? I did. I was kind of like, oh my God, we're screwed, right? But I think in reality, it turned out to be far different. And so, but that's one of the scenarios that's out there. But I think a lot of what we do and kind of the core tenets of the 4 areas that I outlined a little bit earlier with education and healthcare and banking and government, they're also going to be a little bit more slower moving than we think. And so I can see things happening in 2 years and 10 years, but who the heck knows?
Hi there, Shawn. Roy Kao from Mars. As a senior advisor in our FinTech, focused on FinTech, I'm fortunate to meet and speak with amazing innovators and entrepreneurs here in the Toronto area on a daily basis. But it also means that I'm on the front line of their feedback loop for frustrations. And one of the frustrations, a lot of our great innovators and with real growth and scalability trajectory are that working with the big 5 or big 6 banks is always a challenge for them in terms of process, in terms of time. And as an outsider now approaching insider status, having a year under your belt, what would you say would be 1 or 2 low-hanging fruit opportunities for the Canadian banking sector as a whole, not just for Scotia, as a whole, that they can improve to adopt some of our best homegrown innovation and talent before they fly the coop down to whether it's Silicon Valley to Singapore or to London?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think design-led product development is a key skill. A lot of our top technical talent has never really taken a design course, and so what we see is smaller and smaller and smaller things being developed by a lot of our top technical talent, and it's just really myopic. And then along with that, what I've seen, and and I talk to our teams about, is that the skills themselves have gotten smaller and smaller too. When I was coming up, and I think it's still applicable, being a full stack engineer meant that you could go from the front end to the back end and cut a vertical slice all the way through. Where that's super relevant for a bank, when we're working with people, by and large, they're either hitting our data, right? It's a data shop. Or they're sitting picking at little things from the front end where they're bolting into a service at the front. But we very rarely meet up with engineering talent or small startups that actually has a comprehensive skill set to be able to dig all the way through with a company that's probably more than 10 years old, right? And so those skills to be able to do that work, I think, are then extensible and scalable for going to the Valley. When I moved to the Valley in 96, 97, there was engineering, and then there was front-end web devs. That was sort of the thing. There's been kind of an amalgamation of those into this new thing where sort of everybody refers to them as, the equivalents. They're not. And so I think for a lot of the young people today to be able to have a comprehensive skill set that cuts across those things. I'm not talking about COBOL or anything like that. I don't want them to go all the way back, but to be able to play with the whole environment on a vertical slice is the thing that we see every single day, even with some of our top development talent, that if they had a little bit more of that, they'd be able to play with and kind of paint a broader canvas. So I think those two things, right? More comprehensive set of skills as opposed to the specialization to be able to do that vertical cut. And then the empathy that is a key part of design thinking. If you've got those two things, you've got a pretty fabulous technology leader.